Hello and welcome to The Digital Insight, the technology, procurement and supply chain podcast that delivers valuable C-level perspective into the core issues surrounding business transformation and digital disruption. Each episode will bring you the most inspiring executive insights from those who are leading transformation strategies within the world's biggest and best-known companies. The Digital Insight. Disrupt, transform, evolve.
Welcome to The Digital Insight, the official podcast series for CPO strategy and interface magazines. My name is Dale, and in today's episode, we take a look at the world of streaming services, as I'm joined by Bhavesh Vaghela, CEO of Singular Decisions. Together, we discuss how a wide range of streaming services, be it sport or entertainment, are failing to connect with consumers on a deeper and psychological level. And we also take a look at why they are continuing to miss the opportunities to do so. This is part one of a series of discussions with Bhavesh on the psychology of the subscriber, a three-part series from Singular Decisions. Welcome to the show, Bhavesh.
Thank you, Dale. I'm pleased to be here.
Now, I'm looking forward to speaking to you today. So before we dig into our kind of topic of discussion, I always like to ask, essentially, who are you and why are we talking to you today? Just so that our listeners can understand exactly a bit more about yourself, a bit more about why you are perhaps an expert in this, or not a thought leader in that. So, give me a bit of an idea for our listeners as to who you are from a career and technology perspective. What's your experience to where you are today?
Sure, yeah, no problem at all. I'm the CEO of a company called Singular Decisions, and I'll talk you through a little bit more about that in a second. But in terms of a career, I'm a B2B marketeer, so marketing's in my passion. I've decided to go into marketing at an early age, through university and so forth. But I think most marketeers will probably stand here and say, well, when I first graduated, I wanted to be a B2C marketeer. I wanted to work in ad agencies. I wanted to do all the cool stuff, create ads, and for big consumer brands. But when you come out of university, you tend to find the first job and end up working for a software business. That was the first job I got, and it was a B2B software business, actually in CRM, which was the early days of when CRM was growing as a application or software platform. Very much on premise in those days. Obviously now it's very much cloud based, but and my career grew from there really. So I've been lucky enough to work for various software companies, both US and European, UK driven ones. Small, medium-sized, fast-growing, been acquired a number of times by the likes of Oracle, OpenText, EMC, and others. And as a marketeer, I've marketed pretty much every industry I can think of. Everything from government to retail, financial services, and it's that real breadth that gives me a view on the idea of the customer. How do you handle the customer? And when I joined Singular Decisions, we're very much in the media space, and I didn't really know much about media at all, really, in terms of the workings of media, and certainly broadcast media. And but what I did realize is I could see how I was consuming content, and I could also see how my teenagers were consuming content, and I could also see the disruption that's happening in the market, and it's kind of proved that way. So, to cut it short, I'm a marketeer. I'm passionate about marketing. I happen to be a B2B, a technology company, and have a lot of experience around the world, dealing with all different types of technologies in different market spaces.
No, fantastic. And we'll jump into obviously a bit more about Singular Decisions in a moment. But just looking at that and looking at the experience, you say yourself, you're a marketeer, B2B marketing, software space, technology. This podcast and through the work I do, we're always talking about digitally enabled experiences, how technology is transforming business, transforming the customer, and a lot of people talk to me about it in language that, because they are CIOs or they're tech people by heart. Obviously, then your job is to kind of look at that from a different perspective, and your experience sort of say is to how do you sell the idea of technology? And one thing I like to ask everybody is that we hear a lot of technology buzz phrases and exciting, sexy words thrown around, but how do you go about breaking that down to actually sort of a level where people can understand, well, this is what it is, and this is what it could mean to your business, but also more importantly, this is why it shouldn't be a part of your business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. I mean, I would say that technology marketeers kind of fall into a trap in many cases. If you're a huge company like an Oracle or an OpenText or Microsoft or whoever it happens to be, I mean, you've got a certain level of brand that you've built. But if you were, a small, fast-growing, new emerging type of technology that's in a disruptive market, which we know technology disrupts markets very, very quickly, and we've seen that even in the last 5 years. So the trick for me, and I've been, I must admit, I've been very lucky. I've worked with some fantastic mentors, and particularly kind of brand experts. And I was told once that there's a couple of things that you need to consider. First of all, there are two elements when you're marketing technology. Actually, it applies to everything, and we'll talk a little bit about this just in the customer journey on subscriptions. But one of them is all about the functional requirement, or the functional element of the product or service that you're trying to market. The second thing is the emotional element of it, and people buy from the emotional side of their brain, not the functional side of their brain. And what you find is you've probably seen it. We see stuff coming out from marketing departments which are very functional. Here's my features and functions of my product and how brilliant it is. But the real trick is, how do you put that into the shoe of the buyer? And the buyer is a human being, right? You're not selling to a corporate with has a building. You're selling to that individual, and therefore you have to treat it very much like a B2C, a kind of a B2C type of approach. So I've always adhered to that. I've always thought about trying to delve into the emotion of the buyer in this context, or the person who's going to be using the software, and how it benefits them or the role that they're in. The other thing that I've always tried to consider when I'm trying to market the software and services that I work for is, in most cases, there's so many technologies out there. You're just one of many competitors, and competitors are saying the same thing. So I was always told, never market to the center of the table, always market to the edge of the table. So always try and be different, and really understand what makes you different, because otherwise you just become the same as everybody else. And I think we can probably plot examples where people have done that and become incredibly different. So from my marketing point of view, and then the creativity and all that comes into play, but those are the two fundamental principles that I always work towards when I'm considering how do we go to market. Think about the person and the emotional side of it, and then also think about how do you make yourself differentiated.
So then, where does Singular Decisions come into that, and how does that approach, how does that mindset, how does that kind of your experience, influence and inform the work you do right now then with Singular Decisions? So I guess really to sum up that kind of waffly question is, who is Singular Decisions? What is the business? And what's your kind of market proposition? What do you do?
Yeah, so Singular Decisions, as I said in my intro as such, before I joined the company, which is about 5 years ago now, 4.5, 5 years ago, I joined as CMO actually, and then I was asked to take over the reins about 2.5 years ago as CEO. So I'm a relatively new CEO, and learning my way through the process as you do. But as an organization, when I first joined, I didn't know much about media, but as I described, the whole transformation happening in the media market was pretty apparent. And I felt that as an organization, what we were very good at is understanding subscribers. And that comes from our background. So we're actually come from an outsourced background where, operators, particularly in the media space, so I should say we focus on pay TV, right? So any kind of pay subscription type of service, typically in the old days, that was cable satellite. Nowadays, it's, we call it OTT or streaming services. So, and everybody's, been able to stream, or you can subscribe to all different types of content. But the key for us is, as an outsourcer, these brands would come to would launch in the market and say, well, we want your technology, but more importantly, we want you to manage our subscribers on our behalf. So we ended up running, thousands of campaigns in order to acquire subscribers, reduce churn, grow ARPUs, which are the key metrics for most subscription businesses. And that becomes the core of what we, were very good at. So when I took over and when I joined the business, I wanted to really transform the organization from being this outsourced service provider into using that knowledge and expertise into a technology platform that operators all over the world can use. And that's why we created Singular Decisions and our platform, which is called Subscriber Intelligence. So for us, it's really, really simple. It's about helping subscription businesses find and execute that perfect growth strategy, which is something that everybody's trying to do.
So let's talk about that then. Let's talk about that kind of OTT streaming services, that subscription. Like you said, particularly in the last 5 years, there's been a huge growth. There's been a huge demand, and obviously with what's happening right now in 2020, obviously with COVID and whatnot, is that obviously then we're seeing a different type of shift. But take us back then to over that 5 years, and particularly up until the beginning of 2020, where obviously the world wasn't normal, but certain things hadn't happened to the severity that they have. How's that conversation changed? How has this sort of idea of streaming and what brands need to be doing in terms of subscriptions, in terms of subscribers and appealing to customers, how did that conversation change over those 5 years up until this year? Like, where were we, for a broad question?
Yeah, no, look, at the end of the day, over the last 5 years, taking away 2020, what's really happened is, the competition has become incredible, right? And you've created, or the market has created, a couple of very large incumbents who are now the norm in streaming, right? So Netflix, Amazon Prime, those kind of large juggernauts that are I guess the staple of the streaming portfolio for any customer these days. 5 years ago, that wasn't the case, right? I mean, so 5 years ago, Netflix was, were in a few markets, and then they launched Netflix Anywhere at CES, which I think was about 4 years ago, if I remember rightly, possibly 5 years ago, which was really their stand to say, we're going to be available in every country around the world. And that just dramatically changed the landscape. Because you think about the consumer experience before that. Well, I needed to sign up. So if you're a UK resident, for example, you'd sign up to Sky or Virgin. You'd be on at least a 12 or an 18-month contract. You'd be paying, subscription fees, but you had no other options in reality. And then somebody like Netflix turns up and says, for less than a tenner, you can have a monthly subscription. You're going to have all this fantastic content, new content. And it kind of drives into that emotional psyche of, freedom and connectedness. You want to have that ability to have control. So that's how it's expanded. And, they were one of the first to really drive that change within the organization, within the industry. Now, what that means is, as an incumbent player, the dominant one or two players in each of the markets, broadcaster, whether you're a telco that's trying to secure broadband, or whether you're a commercial channel like an ITV that's trying to protect advertising revenues, or you are or you're a direct to consumer content provider like a Disney that wants to go direct to market, all of a sudden your world has changed, because all of a sudden you need to think about your customer, because now you're building a direct relationship with your customer that you never had to do before. And more importantly, your price points are going down. More importantly, your customer is able to jump in and out. So it's no longer good enough to have an 18-month contract. I'm used to doing monthly contracts. I want the control. So that entire wave has completely transformed the way we as consumers interact with these types of services. So now I wouldn't say it's a new thing at all. I think it's the norm. I think we've gone beyond the hype phase into something that's now normal. I mean, it is the norm. For the first time in many countries, there's people subscribing more to streaming services than they are to traditional pay TV services. So that flip has already happened, and that's just going to increase. So that causes a significant problem for these incumbents. What do? How do they compete? How do they protect their bases? And we've seen a whole number of things in the last 5 years where, Dale, it's almost like, I almost remember it. It's almost like the e-commerce boom, right? So everybody needed a website. Everybody didn't know why they needed a website, but everybody needed a website, and everybody was building websites. Same thing here. Everybody needs an OTT service. Do they? Why are they doing it? And we've seen OTT services sign up or launch, but then also fail very quickly, because just because I've got an incumbent brand like ITV doesn't mean I'm going to be brilliant at OTT, because it's a completely different mindset and approach. So you're seeing these dominant players coming in who actually fundamentally understand one thing and one thing very, very well. They understand how to use data and how to engage with their customers, whereas this industry has never had to do it before. Um, so that's kind of where we are up until 2020. There's a huge amount of competition. Uh, Brands are trying to figure out how do they play. They're trying to be very defensive to the likes of Netflix and Amazon and those guys, trying different strategies of whether they work with them, don't work with them, aggregation. So, there is that kind of a melting pot of people trying stuff, but not necessarily hugely successful in any particular area.
And what about this last sort of 8 months then, where obviously we've been thrown into a completely different situation? There's the whole idea, the whole idea of a subscriber the behavior of a subscriber has completely changed because they've almost been forced to, rely on streaming services, and they've been kind of forced to sign up where perhaps they wouldn't have done before. How has this last 8 months kind of completely, where possible, changed the conversation and perhaps made that challenge, like we mentioned, even harder?
Oh yeah, I mean it's for a start, it's accelerated it even faster than it was before because, like we've just discussed at the start of this podcast before we came on, we were talking about Zoom and Microsoft Teams and how we're all becoming experts in this. The reality is those technologies were there. It's now this has forced us to use those technologies, and now we've become used to using these type of services in the way we interact. Same thing happens with streaming services. Okay, look, I'm at home, I'm in lockdown. I may have kids, I may not have kids. I've got a lot more time on my hands. I'm worried, I'm stressed, and so forth. So you're looking for an exit. You're looking for an out where you can, kill the time in some ways, but also have some escapism from what is a very depressing, 8 months of market conditions. So streaming services have increased, and we've seen, there's a lot more experimenting going on. There's lots of stats these days where people are starting to, or have over the last 8 months, signed up to multiple. I mean, I was on a webcast yesterday, and we did a poll, so a couple hundred people on it, and how many people had signed up to at least more than one service in the last 6 months. That was in the top 50, 60, 70% mark. People are happy to sign up to that. So that's what we're seeing. We're definitely seeing a growth in streaming services. Now, there is a slight caveat to that. First of all, you've got to think about the context. So we're in the middle of COVID, we're in lockdown. I'm already subscribing to sports services and entertainment services. Sports has disappeared during lockdown, so all of a sudden I don't have any sports anymore. So I'm going to be focusing more on the entertainment side. Now, there's a couple of things that have changed in the last 6 months. Is how do brands think about that? The fact if I'm a sports service provider and there's no longer sports anymore, is it morally right for me to keep charging my customer a monthly subscription fee when I don't have any service to provide them? And we've seen different types of organizations react differently. I mean, what I would say is most have done the honorable thing. Like we see that in banks and other things, other services that we have, as individuals, and people have kind of done payment holidays and paused subscriptions and all those kind of things. But during a pandemic or during these points of crisis, it is an amazing opportunity for brands to build long-term loyal relationships with their customers, because people will remember in their downtimes or the toughest times, which, it's almost like when you get divorced, you really find out who your friends are. And that's very true, because I've been through one, and you kind of really know who your friends are. Or when you have tough times, you know who your friends are going to stand up next to you. Same thing happens with brands. You will remember those brands that were supportive to you during times of tough, and you will remain very loyal to them over a period of time. And, during this pandemic, we've seen the good and the bad in that situation. And some organizations will come out fantastically well because they'll have very loyal customer bases, and others won't do very well at all. So that's kind of how it's changing.
And that leads us quite nicely then into kind of the sort of crux of what we're going to talk about today. Singular Decisions obviously released the first part of a 3-part report, looking at the psychology of a subscriber. And just before actually we jump into that, I'm very curious actually. You mentioned earlier about how now you're a subscriber yourself. You subscribe to sports. You subscribe to streaming services. You're very actively using that. How much does that kind of feed into the work you do. So do you have to kind of separate that when you're, speaking with businesses, speaking and with clients and whatnot? Do you have to kind of ignore the fact that you too are a subscriber and you too might have had, have your own personal opinions, or does that constantly feed into the kind of work you do?
No, I think in this context, I think it constantly feeds into what we do because, it's part and parcel of why we are here. I mean, we all have our own beliefs and values of what we want to achieve as we move our careers and grow our families and so forth. We all have different views on what we want to do. So, I'm a firm believer that the experiences that you have and experiences that your friends and family have, because we're all human beings, right? You can't, the way I interact with a streaming service, whether what I like and don't like, probably there's other people that feel the same. There's probably other people that feel slightly differently to that. And it's really the question of how do you feed your personal experiences and experiences of other people around you into your thinking about what you want to do from building a solution or how you talk to customers. So I actually see it as a strength because we are in that consumer market. We are part of that disruption. All of us are because we're all engaging. And I talk freely. I mean, I have teenage kids. My daughter's 17, my son's 14, almost 15, and they consume very differently in terms of. And I talk to them about it because I'm interested to understand what's going to happen when my daughter's generation become working. What's going to happen with the main television screen that everybody's worried about? How are they going to subscribe to services? How are they going to consume? Because that's the future, right? So I think it's very relevant. I think you should absolutely look at your own experiences, but also recognize that it's an isolated experience. There are other people that will feel slightly differently accordingly, but it's about getting a rounded view of it.
So let's look then at the psychology of a subscriber, part one, acquisition. The kind of two-line synopsis or one-line synopsis is basically asking the question that is your brand behaving as a narcissist and missing opportunities to connect with customers? So weird question, I know, but how can a brand behave like a narcissist, particularly in this kind of streaming and OTT streaming services space?
So it's an interesting one. I mean, when we went into this, we went into the mindset that, again, for all my background, I really wanted to delve into the emotional triggers that consumers have when they sign up to an OTT service or when they're engaged to a streaming service, right? We're all great in saying that it's all about fantastic content, but in a hyper-competitive market, it's got to be more than that. It's got to be more than just content that creates a brand. And again, going back to my experience of working in other markets, you see fantastic brands being built up because they really understand the psyche of the customer that they're looking for. And I felt that's missing. That's definitely missing in this media marketplace because everybody just thinks it's content. That's the thing that you need to have. So when you think about how subscribers interact with services and how therefore a brand interacts with a subscriber, it's very interesting to put a psychological spin on it. And we kind of akin it to a dating relationship. That whole journey that you have with a subscription service, from the moment you decide you want to sign up, through to signing up, going for a trial, then going into consuming the content, and beyond into how long I'm going to keep it, and when I leave, and all those kind of things, which go further down, the acquisition path. Then it's very clear that the way a brand interacts is almost like a narcissist if you take that narcissistic relationship, because it's all about the brand. Think about when you subscribe to any OTT service or any subscription service, it's all about how great that service is. It's all about everything about them. There's all these things about, we're not connecting well enough. We kind of ghost customers. We're only there when we want to be. We're not there when the customer wants us. So you can really see how some of these brands are really missing out on some of the basics of really just listening to their customers and being there at the right time throughout the entire journey. And it was very crystal clear when we had some of the psychologists look at our findings that you could describe them as almost being narcissistic. So I guess it's a headline grabber, but there's a lot of validity towards, as we go through each of the stages, you'll see how they behave in that way.
And again, sort of looking at the the introduction to the report then. So one of the things is that there's a reference to sort of the two key human drives that are present throughout our lives, and obviously these are present in a customer subscriber, and they are a drive for connectedness and a drive for freedom. Now, with connectedness, you kind of have an idea what that means, but how does connectedness and freedom relate to, again, that subscriber model, that streaming service, that relationship between brand and customer?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because those connectedness and freedom are, core emotional values that every human being has, right? I mean, it's just part and parcel. The drive for feeling part of something, but also not to be entrapped, not to be trapped into something, are just common. I think common. They're just the core values that we have, and that starts from it's described in the paper from when we're in the womb, right? We want to feel connected, and that's the umbilical cord, but we also want the freedom to grow, and that continues throughout your entire adulthood and life moving forward. So in the same way, you've got a brand, that an OTT streaming service, which gives you that to a certain degree, that freedom and that connectedness. You can feel part of a community that love that type of content, for example. So they're very attractive because it puts the viewer in control. So the idea of, if I'm sitting in front of normal linear TV, I don't control when that happens. Whereas now on the streaming services, I'm in complete control when I watch stuff. That's very appealing. That gives me the ability to be free and decide on what I want to do. In the same way, I know that lots of my friends are watching, I don't know, Breaking Bad or whatever the latest hit series is, or and that makes me feel more connected because I'm also like my friends and I love watching that. So that's the thing that OTT brands have, but equally that's a double-edged sword, because we talk about later on, when you ask for payment, for example, that almost slams the freedom straight away. So it's been subtle along that, but that's fundamentally what this is about. The OTT brand has that capability of connecting to those core values of being connected as well as having freedom.
So looking then at again, we're not going to sort of dive in page by page. Obviously, we want people to kind of access this and read it themselves. So we'll look at kind of that surface level. But there's 6 key learnings that have been identified. So obviously 6 key takeaways that if someone wants to just flick over it, would see these are sort of the ways in which, I don't want to say the word failure suggests that people are doing it wrong, but obviously there's always room for improvement. So looking then at that connectedness and that drive for freedom, one of the key learnings is that within the subscriber psyche, psychological drivers for both freedom and connectedness unconsciously motivate their behaviors and interactions. But then obviously, in order to access that, brands need to understand both mood, mindset, and layers of the human emotion of the subscriber. Where's the disconnect? How are they not? And big question, why is there a disconnect? Why is that kind of a difficult thing for brands to achieve?
There's multiple ways to answer that, obviously, but I mean, I think if you think about where the disconnect is, you just have to sign up to a service, and you probably will see this. Up until now, consumers are loyal to the content, not the subscription service, right? So, sports is slightly different, because sports people, fanatics about particular sports, and they will go where the sport is. But on the entertainment side, you're equally, fanatical about particular types of genres and stuff like that. Now, if that content stopped and moved from one service to the other, you'd probably just go to the other service. So that's the byproduct of just pushing the content message all the time. So you as a brand are not able to create your own brand and your own values about what you stand for. Probably Netflix is probably the only one, I would argue, that have got to a point where people are loyal to Netflix, not necessarily the content that's within that. And they do some fantastically good stuff. But even they struggle to really understand the emotional psyche of what's happening at what stage. For example, when you're signing up to a service, right, and we call it the join moment, then what's happening there? Well, you're enthusiastic as a consumer, and you've got this balance between the emotion and the transaction that I talked about before. So I'm emotionally happy. I want to sign up to this service. Maybe my friends have told me about it, or they're talking about this great piece of content. I want to feel part of that. I want to sign up. So I go onto the website and I try and sign up. Now, it's no different to being in an e-commerce transaction where you start kind of getting um, a bit concerned. You put the brakes on a little bit because you're not 100% confident that you want to go through with it. Typically people come on the website multiple times before they actually finally sign up to something. So you're going through that process. You then start filling out the registration to kind of sign up to the service. And the first thing they ask you for is credit card details. And you're like, whoa, as soon as you start talking about money, then all of a sudden a different level of emotion kind of hits you. And it's almost like going on a first, it's almost like going on trying to arrange a date. And you're saying to somebody, well, you know, um, uh, I need to know as much, I need you to kind of give me your credit card details before you turn up to the date. That doesn't make sense. It's kind of like a very clear barrier that comes up. So almost at the start of the relationship, you're almost putting the customer in a negative mindset, and that's not really a great place to be when you're trying to create a long-term customer. So that's just one example. Another example is when you're actually signed up and you're in a trial moment. Most of these services will offer a free trial, right? Whether that's 1 month or a week or whatever they want to look at. Now, just think about it from this point of view. So here I am as a consumer. I'm about to sign up to your service because you're offering a free trial. But again, you're asking me for my credit card details. Why do I need to give you my credit card? Why don't I even have that? I need to experience you. It's almost like dating where the person's saying, "Well, give me your phone. I'm going to give you the phone after you finished your date." Well, I need to know you more. You need to help me know you more. You need to help me understand you more. And it's those kind of emotional triggers that brands are not are not jumping on or not trying to drive. All they're really trying to do is here's how much it's going to cost, and here's the content that I've got. There's no levels beneath that, and that's the trick. Because if you really are trying to build a sustainable subscription-based business, then you really need to think about how do you tap into the human emotion that builds long-term loyalty. So that's where the real problem lies, or that's where the opportunity is.
And one of the things, in an ideal world, and each and every customer and each and every subscriber would have such control and power over the decisions that a brand would make from a customer's perspective, of course. But we know that ultimately that kind of can't happen, because if you're dealing with customers in thousands and almost even millions, it's just kind of not feasible. But obviously, one of the things here is that subscribers select services that give them control, help them develop and reinforce a sense of personal identity. So, given what we've just been saying about, it's kind of impossible to give every single customer a complete control and complete kind of identity and complete, autonomy. What can brands do to at least give them a sense of that then, rather, because you and I have just said, and you and I know it's just not possible to do it to the degree that we would want.
Yeah, of course. And, there are constraints towards this. Obviously, this is, it's, as marketeers, we've been talking about this from, it's our nirvana, right? It's one-to-one, personalized, communicating to the customer in the right way at the right time. And that's ultimately where everybody wants to get to. And you quite rightly say, if you've got millions of customers or subscribers, it's very difficult to do. And that's where data plays a huge part towards driving that kind of engagement. But there's some simple things, right? Demonstrate to your customer what your brand values are and that you're there for them. So, for example, when they first sign up, help them navigate. How easy is it for them to navigate your system? I've been on services where they kind of put an overlay on the screen that gives you tips of where you need to go. Right now, that's not happening. That there's just simple ways of making the customer feel that you're on their side, that you're trying to help them. Judge the mood, right? For example, when I log in, why don't you ask me how I'm feeling? Am I feeling happy? Am I had a tough day? What is it? What's kind of my we call it archetypes, but in the paper. But what's my mood at that point? Because that allows me as a brand to start thinking about, okay, so at certain moods, customers went for this type of content. So all of a sudden, I'm starting to build a more tailored experience towards my customer. Even in the join process, right? When you're in the middle of signing up, perhaps be a bit radical. Don't ask them for credit card details. Get them to go and enjoy the trial moment, enjoy their content, and at the point of enjoyment, we talk about dopamine in the paper was released. You're in a much more happier state. If you ask me then for my credit card, I'm going to give it to you because I feel comfortable, a lot more comfortable with what I'm using. So there's technology things that a brand can do, but there's just simple customer experience type stuff that just makes the overall experience better for the customer. And it's that kind of element that helps you build that loyalty with your customer base.
And do you think there's a fear? Because you mentioned then, and it's not something entirely radical, but it's such a norm that when somebody goes to subscribe, somebody goes to kind of invest in something that there's just essentially credit card details. That's kind of, we expect that to happen. So to take that opportunity to take that process away as a means of sort of encouraging the customer, enticing them some more, is there a fear of doing that? What's stopping companies and brands from doing that, do you think?
Very, very, very simple, really. I mean, the research, and as the research was done with some huge focus groups both in the UK and US, and it was consistent, right? Every single person, pretty much, at that point of credit card, there was this almost like your back goes up, right? You just fear, the anger, at different levels, but that's the emotional feelings that customers have at that point. Now, people still do put the credit card details and forward, but they almost see it as brands are trying to, put the wool over their eyes, or in a sense that they know that you think I'm going to forget to cancel, so you're going to bill me, right? That's kind of the mindset. So why do brands do it? Well, for that very reason, because they know that people will forget to cancel. So therefore, I can bill the customer the moment they're out of their trial, so I can start charging. Now, it's about revenue, right? It's about driving that revenue, and that's why they do it. In the same way, you find that a lot of brands will not communicate to customers who are subscribing because they don't want to wake them up. They don't want to think, oh my God, I have not been using this service for a while, so I'm going to go and cancel. It's like a gym membership, right? Your gym's not going to communicate to you month 3 if you haven't turned up for about 2 months, because they know that subscription will carry on going until there's a point in your life where you think, I want to cancel it. But doesn't that sound like you're not really understanding the customer very well? You're not doing you're not treating the customer the way you want to, and the customer wants to be treated. Now, it takes a brave brand to do that. In the same way when you want to cancel, right? So back in the day, trying to cancel something was a nightmare. You'd either phone the contact center up and you'd ask for cancellation. They'll try and convince you to stay, etc., etc., etc. Well, if you just make it easy for me to cancel, guess what? I'm going to probably be more loyal and I'll come back quicker. So it really just comes down to revenue and ability to retain revenue as quickly as possible. And that's why they do it. They know customers are going to forget. But the flip side of that, customers also know that that we're going to forget. So wouldn't that be refreshing if a brand says to you, look, we're going to let you know that that we're not that your subscription's coming to an end, or actually we're not going to charge you at all. We're going to, you can put your credit card details at that point. And one of the things that we describe in the paper is if you ask for credit card details at the end of the trial, then actually there's a different emotion, which is the fear of losing out. Because at that point, I've had a month's worth of experience. I've loved it. And now I don't want to not have it in my life. So you're more likely to give the credit card details. So I think there's business reasons why that doesn't happen, as well as technological reasons in terms of being able to react quickly enough. One of the big things that's a big problem for brands is being able to activate data in real time. We've been talking about data and big data for years, but the reality is businesses within or business owners within corporations are not able to react fast enough. You have to be able to do things in real time in this context, and if you can't, your customer's going to leave because these guys, we're on monthly life cycles, so there are constraints, but some of it's about mindset, and it's about trying to set a set of values for the brand that you want to be.
The report has a number of best practices that companies can do and companies shouldn't do, and things that companies shouldn't do, obviously in terms of understanding their subscribers. And I'm just going to go over some of the brief ones here. So companies should find out where improvements can be made and give rewards to new customers in exchange for their suggestions. They should help subscribers spread the word by creating easily shareable content, simple invitations for friends, and opportunities to give feedback linked in with social media accounts. They shouldn't forget about, or as you said earlier, ghost subscribers after registration. And they shouldn't really make the sign-up process difficult, clunky, or long-winded. Now, those are just a few, of course, and I'm not going to ask you to tell me every single thing that they should do. But if a company or a brand is finding themselves struggling and they need some form of advice, and one big takeaway from this report, what would you say that is? If they, to what extent they do certain things is up to them. But if there's just one thing that you think you would tell them that would kind of put them in the right direction, what would it be?
I think ultimately it's about trying to find a way to build a two-way dialogue with your customers. That's the key, right? So ask questions and listen. And that can be done in so many different ways. That can be done through what the data's telling you, but also asking. I mean, there are ways to make a customer feel comfortable in the sign-up process. There are ways to make a customer engage with your service during a trial process. Those are all tactics, but fundamentally it has to be around very clearly understanding what you stand for as a brand and the type of service you want to be. And then it's playing on those elements within the experience that you provide. A classic one, by the way, I mean, you've mentioned it's an absolute classic, is the moment I come out of a trial and I'm now paying for a subscription, it's the highest enthusiasm I have for your service. I mean, dopamine is released at that point. So use that moment to help me tell other people about you guys, about the brand. So lots of really cool tips, but I think fundamentally it comes down to that emotional versus transactional. Think more emotion and not just transaction. And there's many ways of doing that.
And I guess the final question then for everybody listening is, where can they find out this report? Where can they access this report? And how best can they also access Singular Decisions?
Yeah, I mean, so you can go to singulardecisions.com. You can download the white paper or the report from there. You can reach out to us. We do a whole bunch of things like workshops and help brands at the early stage think a little bit more about their customer journey, how they are approaching it, and how they're the different stages and the bottlenecks they may have along those stages. So we can certainly help around that. And we don't, even before you think about technology, it's just that understanding how your business is geared towards managing that subscriber journey. Coming along is we've got part 2 and part 3 of the report where we look at the whole journey. This one is just about acquisition. The next one is about growth, which is really all about when a customer signs up, then what? I've got to keep them loyal for as long as I can. And the third one will be about churn, and that's due out, in the middle of the end of August. The paper will be out, I think it's the 25th, and there'll be the third one will be about 6 weeks later. So, keep an eye on the website, and if you follow our social media, you'll see a lot more about what we're doing around the psychology of a subscriber.
Fantastic. Bhavesh, thanks for joining me.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for asking the questions. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Insight Podcast in association with the Interface.net and CPOstrategy.com. The Digital Insight is brought to you by B2E Media Limited. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate and review. And don't forget to check out our podcast archive at www.b2e-media.com/The Digital Insight.